Alright, so in this video we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Vankyo Matrixpad S20 budget tablet. We're going to do some benchmarking, and then we'll do some retro game emulation testing on it. This is Steve from Restalgia, and let's get started. Alright, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, thank you for clicking on that video. Today we're going to go ahead and take a look at yet another budget tablet that was sent over to me for review by a company called Vankyo. Now, a while back I actually did another review on one of their tablets, and it was a fairly good device for the price at the time. Now, the model that we're going to be looking at today is part of their Matrixpad lineup, and the specific version that I have is the Matrixpad S20. Now let's go ahead and take a look at what comes inside of the box. So front and center is obviously our tablet, but we are going to go ahead and set that aside and take a look at the rest of the contents from in the box. Next, we do get some quick start guides and an instruction manual. And then finally, we have our USB-C type charging cable for data transfer, as well as a power brick. Looking over the device itself, it is a fairly solid tablet with some really good weight to it. Now, it is a budget device, but it doesn't really feel that cheap, and the main panel wrapping around the device itself is actually made from aluminum, but the surrounding edges are made from what looks like a plastic painted to match type of material. Looking around the device for our I/O, on the bottom we have our stereo speakers. On the right side of the device, we have a 3.5mm headphone jack, as well as our volume buttons and a power button. Nothing is on the other side, but on the top is where we have our USB Type-C port and our micro SD card slot. Overall, I think this is a fairly nicely designed tablet without the typical enormous side bezels that we tend to see on some of these budget devices. Now, in terms of the technical specs that come with this device, we've got a 10.1-inch IPS display with a resolution of 1280 by 800. It has an 8-megapixel rear-facing camera and a 5-megapixel front-facing camera. An 8-core ARM A55 CPU clocked in at 1.6 GHz. The GPU on this thing is a PowerVM Rogue GE8322, and the device actually comes with 3 gigs of LPDDR3 RAM. And the device that I was specifically sent has 32 gigs of onboard storage, but you can buy this as a 64 gigabyte size, as well as it does have a micro SD card expansion slot, so you can expand storage up to 128 gigs. Additionally, this has built-in Bluetooth 5.0, and it does have a dual-band Wi-Fi system. And then finally, this has a 6,000 milliamp hour battery that provides about 10 or so hours of use between charges. Going over the base functions of the device, the touchscreen actually feels fairly fluid. Now, a lot of these cheaper Android tablets can feel a bit janky when you're navigating around and the screen doesn't really move and flow as smoothly as you'd want it to. But this actually feels really smooth, and it does give you a very good overall experience. Now, Vankyo has been promoting specific built-in features like the ability to turn on what they call a read mode, which essentially just kind of turns the screen into like a grayscale screen, so it's similar to what you would see on an e-reader, and it just makes, reading documents a little bit nicer on your eyes. Now, the screen itself is actually fairly bright and vibrant, and it does play content really well. Now, I had absolutely no issues with viewing angles on the device, and I tested this out with some Netflix videos as well.
So does this mean we can keep your car? Absolutely not, but I do want to help. Hey, you got your phone on you? You know it! Let's make a video.
Playback was great, and although you can tell that the speakers are cheap, they aren't really very tinny, and they don't negatively affect the viewing or listening experience very much. Now, I did also put this tablet through some different benchmarking tests, and to be completely honest, it didn't really come back with some overly stellar results. In terms of the single core performance, it ranked at 146, which is actually pretty low even for a budget tablet. And even across multiple cores, it only came back with a score of 784. Now, there are definitely other tablets in the same price range that will actually offer much higher performance than this tablet can. And before I jump into any sort of emulation testing or things like that, I did want to test out some Android games that you can download directly from the App Store. Now overall, all of the lower graphical type of games ran fairly well. I did go ahead and test the Sega Sonic app, and I did also test a Rayman game, and they both actually played pretty good. That being said, if you're looking to play some of the higher end games like Call of Duty Mobile, this is probably not the best device for you. The game was certainly playable, but there was definitely some noticeable lag, and the gameplay was not as smooth as it should be for a game like this. Shifting into emulation, this device has no real issue with any of the lower end emulation consoles. Things like NES, Atari, Game Boy Color, MAME, CPS-1, CPS-2, and all of those types of games will run without much of any problems at all. Now I do like to test SNES simply because I found that on a lot of these lower end chipsets they don't play them properly, especially when we are looking at some of the FX enabled games. Now in this case, all of the Super Nintendo games that I did test played exactly as they should, including those FX enabled games. Now I also did want to show some Sega Genesis and throw that into the mix and just compare some of the gameplay to the Android app versions that I downloaded earlier. Overall, Genesis had absolutely no issues playing whatsoever either. So next we're going to move into some of the more difficult to emulate consoles. So I did throw in some PlayStation 1 titles, and they actually played fairly well. Now I did include some of the harder to play games like Bloody Roar 2, just to test a more demanding title, and although we did have some audio stuttering, it really wasn't that terrible. There was nothing that stopped me from enjoying the gameplay experience. Now moving into some of the much more difficult emulation consoles, we're going to jump into some N64, and to be honest, this was hit and miss. Some of the easier to emulate games like Mario Kart ran fairly well, and I was even able to get games like Donkey Kong 64 to play with little to no issues. However, there was some serious frame rate drops that happened on games like GoldenEye, which definitely took away from the experience, and I would say that those games would probably be unplayable. And then finally, I decided to test out some Dreamcast, and this was really not a good experience. Now, I was using the Redream emulator, but there was a handful of frame rate drops, and depending on how many assets were on the screen from time to time, it actually got pretty bad. Even some of the easier to emulate 2D fighters like Marvel vs. Capcom 2 had some screen tearing, audio issues, and graphical display problems. Now coming around full circle on this device, it is currently on Amazon for about $130 US, but they do often offer coupons for as much as $20 off. For example, right now, you can get that coupon and you can buy this device for about 110 bucks. So if you can pick this up for about 110 bucks, I'd say that it is a fairly decent deal, especially if you're not super worried about gaming on the tablet and you're mostly going to use this for things like video streaming or web browsing. But you really should consider all of your options if you are in the market, and this item is listed at its regular price with no additional discounts. But that's pretty much all I've got for you guys in this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, hit that thumbs up button if you liked the video, and thumbs down if you didn't. Thank you so very much for watching, and I will talk to you guys again real soon.